Rachel, George, a very difficult year ahead for foreign policy for Labour. Top of the agenda is the imminent Trump presidency, part 2, and conflict in the Middle East. But let's talk about another foreign policy story which has been developing this week. Prince Andrew's friendships, shall we say, have once again come under scrutiny as it's been revealed that he'd formed, quote, an unusual degree of trust with an alleged Chinese spy who has now been named as Yang Tengbo. Embarrassing for the royal family, again, particularly as this appeared to be taking place just months after that disastrous Newsnight interview with Emily Maitlis, which everybody will have seen. But it's not great for Britain and its position on the world stage either. We hear that the prince is no longer invited to the family crimbo this year. Is it going to change his access to resources or his standing?
Well, I think his access to resources and his standing have already been greatly reduced since that interview. And I think that the thing that was keeping Prince Andrew at the centre of the royal family, even when some of these various scandals started to break, was the fact that he was reportedly the Queen's favourite child, or a child that she very much wanted to keep close in the family. And obviously, the Queen is no longer with us, and King Charles has talked about a slimmed down monarchy for years and years and years and years and years. And so pushing the Duke of York to one side for very, very good PR reasons isn't the kind of family crisis thing that it would have been a couple of years ago. But yeah, I think they've just priced in the fact that there are going to be embarrassing stories about Prince Andrew probably for some time to come.
George, it's fair to say not just Prince Andrew, though, actually, who's been caught up in this. Two former Conservative Prime Ministers, David Cameron and Theresa May, have both been, they're in a photograph with this alleged spy as well, though we don't really have many more details around the circumstances. But it speaks to something wider, doesn't it, about the UK's relationship with China and what that should be. And when you interviewed David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, the same day that Keir Starmer met with Xi Jinping, what feeling did you get of what the government stance is likely to be going forward when it comes to China?
So David Lammy's position is that the UK needs a relationship with China, and that under the Conservatives, that had really deteriorated to a level not seen in any other G7 country in terms of Keir Starmer was the first British Prime Minister to meet Xi Jinping for years. Rishi Sunak regularly labelled China a threat. Lammy takes a pragmatic view, which is that China's an economic superpower, it's potentially a future military superpower. From simply a perspective of national self-interest, you need to be able to do business with them. There's also an economic point that a lot of Labour's net zero agenda, particularly clean power by 2030, depends on tech from China. They also want to attract investment from China. Rachel Reeves is going to make her first trip there early in the new year. But this spying story shows the tensions that are going to exist in that relationship, and there will be pressure not just from the right but from some Labour MPs on this. Now, David Lammy and some says that they have no illusions about China. This isn't Golden Era 2.0. They say they've learned from the mistakes of the Cameron and Osborne era. But the more flashpoints that there are, such as this one, the harder it will become. And there is a clear tension between security interests and economic interests. And to govern is to choose. Labour will be forced at some point to decide ultimately what relationship it wants with China. At the moment, there's lots of positive mood music, but is that sustainable? We saw the Chinese embassy push back very strongly against the government's response to the spying scandal, and you sense that the Chinese know they're in the strong position here. The UK needs China far more than China needs the UK, so it is going to be awkward.
Rachel, George is right, isn't it? That it's not just politics, it's money. And although the China hawks like Ian Duncan Smith, people you'd expect, have used this week as an opportunity to ask why the government's not, designating China a security threat, Britain does need Chinese money, doesn't it? Emma Reynolds, I think the Treasury Minister, recently lobbied against tougher business curbs.
Yes, that was before she was an MP. So she was an MP and then she lost her seat, worked for the CBI and is now back at being an MP and is pensions minister. But yeah, as George said, it's about sort of security versus economic stability. And it's worth remembering that this isn't a Labour dilemma. The reason that the Conservative government approach to China was so inconsistent, David Cameron, George Osborne, we love China, Theresa May, Huawei, we're not sure, oh no, we need the investment again, do we not, Rishi Sunak using very strong negative terms about China, but at the same time, like pushing back a lot of the moves that the China hawks wanted to see to designate it as a threat. The reason for that inconsistency was that tension between we want to show that we're strong and we want to stand up against human rights violations like the Uyghurs, and we want to be very tough when it comes to spying and when it comes to Chinese influence and infiltration of UK universities and these kind of like secret Chinese police stations that sort of operate informally in the UK and all of this stuff. But we don't want to shut off the money. And now that the Conservatives are in opposition, they're able to take a much more united line, which is we need to be really tough and stand up to China. And they're able to do that because they're not in government. They don't have to choose. So there's that aspect of it as well. The row over designating China a threat is to do with this scheme. So foreign lobbyists on behalf of foreign countries would have to register, and there'd be an enhanced tier of restrictions for lobbyists from countries that are designated more likely to be a threat. And there's a huge amount of pressure. There was pressure in the Commons this week for Labour to, one, bring that forward sooner. It's a Conservative era idea that didn't go through when the Conservatives were in government, and two, when it does go through, to put China in the enhanced tier. Now, that would add a lot of restrictions on Chinese investment and collaboration between Chinese and UK businesses. So the business community, the city, financial services in particular, are very worried about this and have been pushing back and saying, no, please don't put China in the enhanced tier. Obviously, if Labour bring forward the scheme and China isn't in the enhanced tier, then that's going to lead to another wave of outrage, saying you're not being tough enough on China, which I think is one reason for them kicking it down the road and saying, we'll make a decision later. And when Rachel Reeves goes to China, there are going to be representatives of British businesses and British financial services firms going with her. So it's a really, really tricky balance, because if you look at all of everything that Labour wants to do at the moment is kind of based on the hope, this elusive kind of, please can we have some economic growth? And for economic growth, we need foreign investment. Where is that investment going to come from? Unfortunately, a lot of the hopes are on China.